Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 60. I'm your host, Dan Matson, a.k.a. Wooden Boat Dan. If you can't do it, nobody can. This is the world's first podcast fully dedicated 125% to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance. Yes, folks, there's a lot of romance in wooden boats in the world. Welcome to the podcast today. Great to have you. If you're a repeat visitor, we're in for a good show. And even if you're not a repeat visitor, you're in for a good show. Anyway, I am sitting at my favorite recording studio spot, which is Bayview State Park in Bayview, Washington. I'm looking north across Padilla Bay towards Lummi Island, Samish Island, Cypress Island, Guaymas Island. This is a cool spot, and it is a gorgeous day here. I love it when I can record my introductions outside. Today's featured segment is an interview with John Lockwood of Port Townsend, Washington. John is the founder and owner of Pygmy Boats, Incorporated in Port Townsend. The interview with John is actually going to be played in two parts. So today I'll play the first half, which is going to be around 40 minutes in length. And then if you'll come back next week, you'll get to hear part two, which is about another 40 minutes. Normally I don't play these in two parts, but an hour and 20 minutes, it made sense to kind of break it up a little bit. So anyway, stick around for part one of that interview. This past weekend, on Saturday, I attended the quarterly, I guess it's a quarterly or triannual, or I don't know about that. It's about 3 times a year, whatever you call that, meeting of the Pacific Northwest Maritime Heritage Council, which is a group of folks that have something to do with the maritime industry in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia, and I think Idaho maybe also. Got a little float plane flying overhead now. You can probably hear that in the background. I'm going to pause just a second. Okay, I am back. So I went to this meeting Saturday in Gig Harbor, Washington, which is a gorgeous little harbor. There's a ton of boating history there. But I met some really cool people. There was about 25 people, I'm guessing, in attendance. Of those 25, I probably know half the people now, which is pretty cool. Maybe more than half. And there were actually 5 people there that I've interviewed for my podcast before. Jake Beatty, Northwest Maritime Center, Pete Leanhouse, Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building, Bob Peck, who's built 19 boats in his career, and Les Bolton, who was my first interview from Grays Harbor Historical Seaport, and Tug Busey was there also, who sailed his little 14-foot sailing pram from Sioux City, Iowa, through the waterways all the way up to Maine. So that was pretty cool. And I connected with some folks that I'm going to be doing interviews with over the next few months. Kim Carver, who lives in Seattle, who's a captain and has sailed tall ships and schooners. Joseph Gavidnik, I don't know if I pronounced that right, who's the curator for the Foss Waterway Museum in Tacoma. Nat Howe with Northwest Seaport in Seattle. Mike Vladovich with the Coastal Heritage Coalition. Betsy Davis, Center for Wooden Boats Executive Director. And Ken Greff, who's with Sound Experience, which is the schooner Adventurous here on the West Coast. And also Guy Hoppin. Now, Guy grew up in Gig Harbor, right on the water, in a house next to his dad's wooden boat shop called Eden Boatyard. And I'm definitely going to be hooking up with Guy for a future interview. The boatyard there originated in about the 1920s, and sometime after that, Guy's dad and another gentleman named Don, Ed and Don. They bought that boat shop and started building boats, called it the Edon Boat Shop. It's a historical preservation site now. I believe it's owned by the city of Gig Harbor. So they basically restored the boat shop. They have classes there. They're building boats. They're restoring the marine railway there. That shop is actually where the idea for a Thunderbird sailboat was conceived back in the 50s based upon a contest or a challenge by the U.S. Plywood Association. So the place is rich with history. They also have a new museum there, and they've got T-Bird number 1 on display. If you're not familiar with the T-Bird, it's a 26-foot, I believe, sloop-rigged plywood boat. There's around 12 or 1,300 of them in the world. It's a sailing class. They're very responsive, fast boat, really fun. I've actually had the chance to sail in one. And they also had at the museum a purse seiner boat called Shenandoah. I forget the exact length. I'm guessing it's around 50 feet. It's a gorgeous boat. So anyway, I'm going to be working on connecting with these people over the next few months for some really fun interviews, so you'll definitely want to stick around for that. I'd like to give a shout out to our new subscribers this week: James McCabe, Tom Strong, Duke McGill, Mike Downing, Brian Errol, Nat Howe, Tom Pearson, Pat Hartle, Les Bolton, Guy Hoppin, Betsy Davis, Ken Greff, Phil Lance, Joseph Gavednik, and Mike Vlahovic. I think that's the most new subscribers I've had in a week, which is pretty cool. The list is growing rapidly. I love it. Okay, we're going to move now into part 1 of the interview with John Lockwood of Pygmy Boats Incorporated. So let's go ahead and roll it. Take it away, John. It is September 12th, 2012. I'm in Port Townsend, Washington with John Lockwood. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and so we're at John's house. You got a really cool house. Is this like a geodesic? Is that what you call it?
Yeah, it's a geodesic dome.
Geodesic home. Very cool. So it's a kind of a cool, cloudy, slightly rainy day here in Port Townsend. And John is the owner and founder of Pygmy Boats. Did it used to be called Pygmy Kayaks, John?
It did.
Okay, because I was looking on the internet today. I'm like, okay, I think it's Pygmy Boats, but Pygmy Kayaks rings a bell.
Yeah, I know. When I built the wine glass wherry, I went, I don't know. Then when I came up with a canoe, we decided maybe it was Pygmy Boats was a better name.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So, John, let's start with your growing up years, kind of 0 to 18. Where did you grow up at, and what were you up to?
I was born and raised in St. Louis.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the huge town. It's not really part of the South. It's surrounded by the South, but it's the home of Monsanto and Brown Shoe, which used to be there. And a lot of transplants from New England and the upper Midwest. Used to go fishing a lot.
Did you?
Yeah.
In the Missouri River or in the lakes or what?
Everything.
Uh-huh.
So, my first contact with water was, my dad was an avid fisherman, and he had a 20-foot aluminum Grumman canoe, and we used to go on outings down into the Ozarks, the Missouri part of the Ozarks, down the current and the 11 points. Drift boating, catching rock bass and sunfish and
really
this and that.
Yeah. Were you doing that at a pretty young age, John?
Yeah, I probably started at 6.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I lived in the local swimming pool every summer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was a golf course that was 3 blocks down Berry Road from where I lived, and then 5 blocks the other direction there was another golf course.
Really? Wow.
So one of them, my parents didn't golf, but they signed us up for a swimming membership, and I and my brothers and sisters lived in the pool all summer long. But anyway, back to boats. My first experience with boats wasn't in the local swimming pool. It was kind of doing canoe fishing with my dad.
Yeah.
When I got older, I got into fly fishing, and we used to go trout fishing. And then I'd go practice fly casting for tiny little stunted sunfish in the golf course ponds.
Oh, really?
On either side of my home, yeah.
So did you like the boating or the fishing part of it better when you were a kid?
I think I liked both.
Yeah.
The big thing is I just loved being outdoors. I got to be just totally into... I was into sports, but I was... the thing I really loved to do was to fish. And when I got to be a teenager, actually younger than that, I probably started quail hunting. So as Missouri got larger, and there was an influx of people that came down from the upper Midwest, the fishing started to get poorer, and my dad switched from fishing to quail hunting and bought himself a couple of bird dogs. And by the time I was 12, he started taking me out quail hunting.
Oh.
And by the time I was 16, I was doing both quail hunting and fishing. I had my own car and used to drive with friends through southern Missouri and southern Illinois. Just wandering either a stream or wandering around kicking up rabbits. It was back in the day where there were no trespassing signs anywhere around. We would often go up and ask for permission, but it was just a courtesy. Life was a lot easier to be outdoors.
Yeah. So quail is a small bird.
Mm-hmm.
You shoot 410s, hunt with 410s?
Yeah,
I had a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge maybe?
I had a 12 gauge. My dad had a 12 gauge Browning over and under shotgun.
Yeah.
And he also had a Sweet 16, which was a semi-automatic.
Okay.
And those were the guns that we used.
Yeah, yeah. Did your mom go along on the canoeing and fishing trips?
She did.
Yeah?
She didn't go along as much as I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, she did.
Yeah. So you've been back. I remember Freya saying that you guys had done a section of the Missouri River.
Right. This
years
is out
ago.
in Montana.
Oh, okay.
The poor Missouri has been dammed in its entirety. There's only 150 miles of free-flowing river left.
Wow.
On the entire length of the thing. And not too far from the longest free-flowing river in the United States, which is, can I guess?
No.
How big do you think it is? You think it's like the Ohio or the Illinois?
No, it sounds like it's small, John. It's a trick question.
It is. It is. It's the Yellowstone.
Oh, the Yellowstone River?
Yeah.
Really?
But there's only 150 miles of free-flowing Missouri River. And I think that's correct. There might be some more up towards the headwater.
Yeah.
But it's out in central Montana. And my daughter and I, her mom and I, and she went down it, I think once, and my daughter and I have been on 2 father-daughter trips down the Missouri. It goes through the Missouri Breaks and through a really pretty section of the country.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So you grew up in Missouri, and then you finished high school in Missouri too, John?
Yeah.
Okay. So what did you do right after high school?
You want everything I did right after high
school? Well, we do have a time limit of some sort here, but did you, tell me generally speaking what you did, John. Did you go you went to Harvard at some point, right?
No, right after high school, I went to Union College in Schenectady, New York, and that lasted a year.
Okay.
And I then sort of launched onto 4 or 5 years of wandering around the United States.
Okay.
I took and 4 other guys, so 5 of us drove. I don't know if they still have them anymore, but there were these drive-away agencies that used to advertise in the newspapers,
yeah,
looking for drivers, and they would deliver cars across the United States for them for free. So they would give you the car, and you would pay the gasoline and get yourself across the United States and deliver it. And they'd go all over the place. So it was a way to get a free, or not free, but a ride across the country, for the price of the gasoline. You could carry whatever you wanted to.
Wow.
And so anyway, that's how I started off. And I ended up first working in a wheat farm in eastern Washington.
Really?
And then on the Lower Granite Dam site, it was actually just a prospective dam site. They were doing core sampling of the bedrock at various places in the Snake. And so I worked for 2 or 3 months. I bought an old Chevrolet, 1953 Chevrolet panel truck, and was living out of the back of it in a 2,000-foot canyon of the Snake, and working as a roughneck, a driller's helper out on this barge. And then I got a job in the Wollowa Mountains for a horse packer.
Where are those mountains?
It's the northeast corner of Oregon.
Oh,
and
really?
I think the Wollowas are one of the most beautiful sets of mountains in the world. They go up to, I think it's just under 11,000 feet, and they're just absolutely exquisite. They're really nice. This guy and his 2 sons owned a cattle ranch in the valley, and in the summer, when the cattle were out to pasture, they would drive 18 miles up a gravel road into the Wollowas, where there was an old log cabin and a corral, and they would run fishermen on horseback with pack animals back up into the mountains all summer long. And I worked in Aspen, Colorado for an entire season. Got
at a ski area? Or?
Yeah. Yeah. Skied 5 days a week, and then I went to Mexico. I don't know,
You were all over the place, John.
Yeah, it was a really good time. It was one of the greatest times of my life, actually, really. I remember it fondly.
Yeah, so you did that for 4 or 5 years, huh?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so I didn't go back to school. I got drafted.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, not one of the cheerier experiences in my life.
Yeah.
I conscripted is the technically correct term. And you can just imagine how I got along with the Army. Somebody who was that free and had kind of broken loose, being told when to get up in the morning and what to wear and what to do and when to eat.
Oh, man, John. Wow.
And, it just goes on and on and on. It was, but shortly after I got out of the service, I took an overseas discharge and worked in Europe for a year and bounced back. I had a great time. It was really a lot of fun.
Were you in the Army?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's the only branch of the service that had
that drafted
a draft.
Yeah.
But I had a great time overseas, and I came back and ended up breaking my hip. And I was on crutches for 7.5 years. And
that was a construction accident?
No, it was a household accident. I fell about 10 feet onto a slab of cement, landed on my side, and pushed my thigh bone. So I pushed that ball on the end of my thigh bone 4 inches through the socket in my pelvis, and broke the pelvic joint. And it was before the day of total hips.
Okay.
And it's a long story, which we do not need to go into.
Yeah, right.
But I was on crutches for 7.5 years, and that was a kind of a devastating event. I mean, it brought to a complete halt. This period in my life before that was basically characterized by me working until I had enough money to take off in my panel van and go back to the mountains. And when I ran out of money, I would go back to work until I had enough money to take off to the next place. And then when I ran out of money, it would cycle over again. And it was really lovely. I mean, I was young and well-spoken and super strong and healthy, and people were happy to hire me. It was really easy to get hired. And they were sorry to see me go, but they didn't really have regrets. I mean, they knew the drill, and I applied for. They put me to work at tasks that were easily trained, that often that required somebody that was attentive and alert and focused. So they got their money's worth out of me, and but that whole period just came to complete.
When you broke your hip. Yeah. Wow. So you had a 7.
So I ended up going to school because I couldn't think of anything else to do.
Oh.
And it's the only reason that this is pertinent to boat building is that if I had not broken my hip, I would have never gone back to school. I mean, it really. The only thing that could have gotten me through school was being 100% disabled. That's really, truly not exaggeration.
Because that was the last thing on your mind before that point, probably.
Yeah, and I was just, it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life once I discovered, that I had an alternative.
Yeah.
And, but it got me. So I was a dyslexic. I was a very slow reader, and not someone who was good at processing massive quantities of information. So I don't absorb great quantities of data really rapidly, but I got through because I was thoughtful and analytic, and I coped with my limitations by taking about half my classes were computer science or in the sciences, and I sort of minored in computer science, and then I majored in anthropology. So I got from that the computer skills that I've got now. When I graduated, I was still on crutches, and well, that's not totally true. When I left Cambridge, I got on a bus with a Klepper collapsible kayak and went to Montreal and got on a train and to Prince Rupert, and then onto a fish boat and crossed the Hecate Strait and dumped off in the water on the north end of the island and was gone for 2.5 years paddling around.
Really?
On crutches, but just desperate to sort of be out of academia and sort of just I loved it. I really got a lot out of school, but a lot of it is just this almost mindless
structure and.
Well, there's a lot of struggles between points of view. I mean. I actually started out in philosophy, and it was just absurd, some of the questions they were trying to get us to take seriously. Does a tree that falls in the woods that nobody hears actually constitute a reality? And I'm going, you really want me to seriously spend a semester on this question? I mean, I was really kind of past that. I had more interesting things to think about in the world and how you lived in it, and to a certain extent, the social sciences were often like that. Harvard was the home of B.F. Skinner, and had a huge school of behaviorists and psychologists, and they were at war with the Freudians, and I was going, so I'm either like a pigeon or I'm like this libido-driven, and I'm, if you've gone past your own culture and those expectations, this is pretty silly stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't do a very good job, and still doesn't do a very good job of describing life or what people really are. So I found my home eventually in anthropology, which was really totally. I mean, I'm reading right now a book on anthropology, and
that's basically the study of people groups and social behavior and that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. I had to look that up, John, because I thought I knew what it meant.
Yeah,
it's I need to know before the interview what anthropology is.
So, and I specialized in hunter-gatherers. So rather than studying, the kings of Mesopotamia or Egypt or Asia or China or Europe, and more of the same old. You don't edit this, so I'm going to try not to swear. It's very difficult for me. The same old stuff. I studied free-ranging hunter-gatherers, and I can go on for hours and hours and hours about that. Moving on, But that's
where you ran across the Pygmy people.
That's where I ran across the Pygmies.
Studies.
But it's also so when I left Cambridge, I had these. I was on crutches, and I had this kayak on my back in a huge pack with shoulder straps, and a couple of duffel bags that also had shoulder straps, and I would gimp along with one of them at a time, on the transfers from hither and yon, and took them all right down to the beach and assembled it the first day we got there. But in that gear, I had 50 pages of the Chappell and Adley's drawings of the Chappell and Adley's bark and skin canoes of North America, and of drawings of traditional Greenland Eskimos designs.
Oh, really?
And because I'd already done one kayak trip down the Yukon River, so on summer vacation, in one of the summers that I was at Harvard, I think it was the second summer I was there, I did another trip with a kayak and a bag to Whitehorse, and did the same thing. Got off the bus in Whitehorse and took the boat down to the water and spent 2.5 months going down the Yukon River. And so I'm not sure I knew exactly what I was going to do with these drawings, actually, to tell you the truth. But I had them in my duffel, and I had 150 pages of Kwakiutl food recipes. Because on the Yukon, I probably ate about 50% of the food I consumed by volume was northern pike and rabbits, varying hare, that I'd snared. And so by the time I got done with the Charlottes, there were like lots of stuff that I knew how to. I also had. So
you knew how to harvest and eat off the land.
I really got
fish
into it in the Charlottes. It was really
cool.
fun.
And you were doing that. You did that for over 2 years, John.
Yeah,
the Charlottes.
Yeah, but the hook that takes us back to boats is that in the Charlottes, there's a 25-foot tide rise in the new moon and full moon in the summer in the Charlottes.
Wow.
And on the east coast of the Charlottes, on Hecate Strait, has a huge tidal variance, and you can take off in the morning, at close to high tide, move your boat to the water, pack it up, and then if you paddle 5 or 6 hours, and stop a couple times for breaks, and just pull your boat up on the beach and wander around to have a snack, and then get back to the boat, stretch your legs. By the time you're ready to camp for the evening, the beach can be 1/4 of a mile out, and so you're on crutches, and everything you carry is got to go on your back. And all my bags I'd sewn kind of 2.5-inch webbing to the bag, so I could put 2 or 3 of them over my shoulders and gimp up the beach. And pile them up and go back down and get the rest. And then I was traveling with a girlfriend that I had been living with in Cambridge, and she would get on one side of the boat and I would get on the other, and we'd stand facing one another in the middle and bend over. It was a big Klepper double, the Arias, and we'd bend over and grab the gunnels and step forward one step and lift and swing the boat one full arm length. And then I would hop a couple of times and we'd bend down and grab it again and swing it another full arm length. Then I'd hop a couple of times.
Oh my goodness,
and we'd go up whatever the length of the beach was. And I know it sounds really weird. It was weird. But it actually,
like determination.
We'd get up the beach. Well, it would take, frankly, it usually wouldn't take more than 15, 20 minutes to get up even a long beach. I mean, we were both young and healthy. And
just want to get up above high tide for the night.
Yeah, you got to get well above high tide. You never know what's going to happen. The ocean's a funny place. It can produce all kinds of...
Where was the Klepper canoe made, John?
It's German.
Is it
been
really?
Around for a long time.
When did they start making those? Do you know? Is that like
I'd guess the 30s or the 40s. Oh, they were definitely for sale in the 50s, and I don't, because I got mine in the 60s, so that style of I think Klepper was one of the early companies that did it. I know that in the United States there was a huge collection of people in the United States that built fold boats, which were the same sort of technology, but didn't I think the early ones didn't actually fold. They were you constructed this wooden frame and then canvassed it, but at some point they like the Klepper had a collapsible frame that you could reach in the cockpit area and disconnect the front and back half of the frame and pull the two ends out.
Was that
and
wood or
collapse it.
aluminum, John?
It was all wood.
It was all wood?
Yeah.
Really?
In the early days it was all wood. Many of them had either brass or aluminum fittings that would be used to clip the parts together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there were clubs, big clubs in the United States. It was a very common style of boat in the 40s. So I can't tell you exactly when it started.
Those were a little more flat bottom than a traditional kayak, were they? Or?
So traditional kayaks didn't exist in the United States, period.
At that time, yeah.
And, when I was on the Queen Charlotte's, there wasn't, in 1971 through 73. So where we were going to this was so we were out for almost 5 months the first summer in this Klepper, and lived in a one-room cabin that somebody had built and had gone back east for the winter, and then the next summer we went out for 4 months, and the following winter I built my first stitch and glue kayak, and the reason was that I could drag it up and down the beach. So it was a standard plywood kayak. It was actually made from Brunswick plywood too, which was available on the West Coast, if you can believe it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I ordered it in from Vancouver, and it's a German company that produced a very high grade Okumi plywood, which is essentially the same stuff that we're still using. I don't Brunswick.
But that was well before British Standard 1088 and all that stuff, probably.
No. I think it actually was British Standard 1088, and England already had a stitch and glue kayak manufacturer and a couple of manufacturers that did small sailing dinghies that were stitch and glue, made with these high quality 1088 marine plywoods.
Did you buy plans for that then?
No.
Or what?
No.
How did you?
I can't remember how I'd read, or I hadn't actually seen one. I may have seen actually when I bought my first collapsible kayak, My first klepper in, I think it was Lincoln, Massachusetts. I saw a brochure for one of these stitch and glue places, and had essentially remembered, how it was done. And their boats did not look like sea kayaks. So almost all of the European kayaks had a cockpit, had a deck that went down from the front and the back of the cockpit towards the ends. Oh. So in all the Greenland boats, the lines of the boat go from the front and back of the cockpit down and then back up again. They have full rising bows that are made to have enough buoyancy to slice into waves and rise and go up over the top of them. And even the Aleutian Islands boats don't have as full lines, but they have a very, very full stern that has a lot of buoyancy, and they have a very, very long bow, and the center of gravity of the boat is well aft. They have a very light and responsive bow that also rides really rapidly in waves. But in all of these, both full boat and klepper and pretty much everybody else that made anything that looked like a kayak were based on these sort of European boats that had been primarily developed for use on the Thames and the Rhine and the Rhone. They were big flatwater river and lake boats that had and so in the United States there were whitewater boats that, I'm trying to think, there were already whitewater boats, but there was nothing that really looked like a traditional sea kayak, that was fairly narrow and had rising lines towards the ends.
So the first one you built was more
based on Greenland lines.
Oh, it was?
Yeah. So it was designed straight from one of the pages.
Okay, so you took the stitch and glue method that was coming from Europe.
Yeah.
At that time, and you kind of melted
applied
that
it to
with
a
the
traditional
Greenland stuff.
Yeah, well, any boat that can be made out of battens, essentially has, a chine. And in other words, the batten that's inside a skin boat can function as the chine log inside a standard plywood boat.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I built the boat the traditional way for building plywood boats. So I took these lines and I modified them because the Greenland boats they have several characteristics. One of them is most of them are 19 inches more or less wide, and most of them were only 6 3/4 to 7 inches in height to the shear line. And so they're very, very, very low to the water. They weathercocked badly. So they were designed to be able to paddle at high speed towards, this is some speculation on my part, but
for hunting,
they were designed for hunting almost exclusively. They were not designed to carry anything inside the boat.
Yeah.
They weren't. And in fact, if they killed a seal or something, they would drape it over the rear deck, or they would attach a float to it and drag it. But they would not try to get any substantial weight inside their boats. Generally. And so anyway, they would paddle towards an animal, and if the boat weathercocked, which means it turned strongly into the wind, they could glide. They'd get up to speed. They'd set down their paddle in a special paddle park, and they'd pick up their harpoon and attach it to a throwing stick and set and launch their harpoon, all while they're gliding at high speed towards the animal. So you want to be able to, or even if that's not your approach, if you're trying to sneak up, you'll often point your boat straight towards the animal and lower your body, and you have a very low profile. And when you're coming straight at an animal, you don't get this as much of the apparent sense of approach, because you're presenting the boat's so narrow and your body's so narrow that there's not, as it gets closer, it doesn't get bigger and bigger
Visually,
and bigger
it's
very
a smaller
much. Right,
object coming at you.
less noticeable by. Anyway, that's the connection where broken hip, school, anthropology is the drawings, and eventually computer science, all come together.
Yeah.
In 1971, actually 72, when I built this first stitch and glue boat. But for your boat builders, what I did was I drew the lines. I scaled it up so I could get my big European feet, into it, and I scaled it up so that I could carry 100 pounds of camping gear inside the boat, which is what we do, but left the lines very much the same. So it's like got flat rear deck. It has a flat foredeck in the front, split that arches towards the front of the cockpit. It had the bow and rake at the stern. It had the rake at the bow and stern, which came right out of the book. It had a degree of rocker, which was pretty much taken right from the book. So this is 5,000 years of tradition.
Yeah. What length was that boat, John?
It was 17 feet.
Okay.
And I put like 3 layers of fiberglass on the bottom, so that I could drag it up and down the beach.
Yeah.
But I designed it. I then lofted it full size. I got my offsets. I lofted it full size on the shop floor. I found an old kind of derelict building that somebody had scored that was also wanting to build something that winter, and let me come in there too. And I lofted it out full size on the floor, and then I lifted off and using battens. So I scored some 20-foot yellow cedar battens and a bunch of weights, and I had Howard Chappell's boat building book.
Okay.
So these are my 2 Bibles. Was the Bark and Skin Canoes in North America and Boat Building by Howard. Howard Chappell was author of both of these, and then lifted the lines off the loft floor, and then set up. Got a strong back. Set up the stations. Set up battens down the chines to tie the stations together, and then I essentially laid a piece of plywood up on this 3-dimensional structure. I essentially planked it with plywood, and then marked the plywood at what would have been the chine logs, and then
cut it.
Took the plywood off of it and cut it, and then I did that for the keel panel and the side panel. And a Greenland boat's a real easy place to start because it's only got. And I only built a half boat, so the stations weren't both sides. It wasn't a full hull; it was half a hull because I didn't need the other half. So it was traditional. If I had the other half, I could have just built a boat. I could have
right over the strong back.
Just essentially spiled planks, cut them, attached them, done the whole thing, left the chine logs in.
So that's where you got your...
But I wanted a lightweight boat, and I just, this wasn't hard to remember this process that I'd seen in a brochure someplace as to how this worked. The company was called Granta, and they had a boat called the Granta Sport, which was really not what I wanted. I mean, it really, truly was not a sea kayak. It was sold as a sea kayak, and it was used, in saltwater all the time. But so was the Klepper. And it's been years. I mean, it took a long time in the United States for people to stop building boats like that. All of the first kayak manufacturers in the Northwest, and pretty much everywhere, built boats that had deck lines that went down from the cockpit towards the bow and stern. And they were also usually oval and flat bottom on the bottom. They looked in cross-section in the middle like a whitewater kayak. And they looked like a whitewater kayak that had been stretched and made 17 feet long and had been turned upside down, and the rocker puttied out of it. So there was this shape up towards the ends where you could see this oval come, and then there'd be this hollow where, and you can still find boats that are manufactured today that have that same hollow at the particularly the stern. It used to be it was both the bow and the stern, and at the stern it's not too bad, but at the bow it's a real disaster, because what happens is that on the water you have this very narrow entry, and then when the waterline crosses the bilge, where this ovoid thing comes up towards the tip, like in a whitewater boat, it's really rockered, and the bilge just essentially goes up to the tip of the end of the boat. Well, if you putty that out, you still have the bilge rising towards the tip of the bow and stern. This was the dominant style from when I got to Seattle in 1977. They just started to make kayaks, and everyone I saw on the market from the major manufacturers in Seattle all looked the same way. And I remember thinking, this is
really yeah.
This is like, these guys don't know what a sea kayaks look like. Yeah. And they had all been whitewater paddlers themselves.
Oh.
I think. I'm not a historian of local kayak design, but I'm pretty sure they were. And what happens is, so you actually have a bilge that rises just like in a whitewater boat from the center up to the bow and stern tip. And the water line starts off, up on the side of the boat in the center, and the bilge is rising, and when it crosses the bilge, it goes around the bilge into this hollow. And so if you look at it from the other perspective, it has this very fine entry, and then you come back about 2 or 3 feet, and all of a sudden it swells out and around the bilge, and you have this
a lot of resistance in the water.
You have a pronounced discontinuity in the water line. So in this water lines, for all of yous out there in podcast lands, the buttocks are vertical, the water lines are horizontal, slices through boats, so you can see what the laminar flow from front to back is going to be like. And what it will do, because it's at the waterline where you're developing a wake up at the bow, is as you paddle hard enough to be producing a wake, it'll hit this discontinuity and produce a big wave that, a big wake that comes off to both sides, which is a lot of resistance. I mean, the boat really, you can see the boat having to push against this discontinuity. And the harder and harder you paddle, the closer you get to your hull speed, the more pronounced this effect is. But in any event, in my first boat in 1972, that was where I relied upon the Eskimo, no such thing existed.
Yeah. You still have that boat, John?
I don't. It got stolen off the top of my car.
Oh, bummer.
In Seattle, I lived about 2.5 blocks. I lived right north of the Union Bridge on Roosevelt Avenue in the University District.
Yeah.
And did I say Union Bridge? University Bridge.
University Bridge. Yeah.
And I used to walk the boat down to the shore, Lake Union, in the afternoon, and put it in with. By that point, I'd built another, and I had 2 stitch blue boats, and I like urban paddling. It was really fun to paddle down past Gasworks Park and around through the Cut, and out into Ballard, and we used to pull our boats out on a parking lot at the Wharf restaurant, giant parking lot, in the late afternoon in the summer, and just leave our boats unattended in the parking lot and go up to the second story deck and do happy hour, sit out in the sunshine, and then paddle back in the late evening sun. It was really nice.
Fun. Yeah. So you were working in Seattle at that point.
Yeah, as a computer programmer.
Yeah.
The other thing I got from breaking my hip was sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day, killing myself.
I can relate to that, John.
Hunter-gatherers don't do this,
What's that?
Hunter-gatherers don't do this. European anthropologists, snuffy snobs that they are, would huff about how lazy they were and undisciplined and blah, 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 blah. And they just thought Europeans were idiots. And we are. I mean, like, who'd voluntarily sit at a desk their whole life?
Yeah. So you were in Seattle working at a desk, and you had a couple kayaks, and then what happened after that, John? You got the turn. We're doing okay on time. We're about 40 minutes in here, so we got 10, 15 minutes. We're okay.
We should have cut out the first half an hour and gone.
No, we're good. Food. We're good, John. Trust me. People will listen to this. Thanks, John, for taking time to do the interview. Again, that was part 1. Part 2 will be in episode 61 next week, so please come back for that episode. I would really appreciate it if you would connect with me. You can grab me on the email. Well, you can't grab me on the email, but you can send me a message on email to dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can subscribe to my e-news list if you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. You can leave comments on my website, which is also a blog post for each podcast that I produce and publish. I also write some show notes, and I have photographs there related to the podcast. So if you don't check that out, or if you haven't checked that out, please do so. That's kind of a fun place to go. So you can leave comments there also. You can find me on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/woodenboatdan, and I did a little photo album there of my trip this past weekend to Pacific Northwest Maritime Heritage Council meeting and some of the cool boats I saw there at the Eden Boat Yard and so on. So check that out. You can also find me on iTunes if you go to the iTunes store to the podcast section. And if you search there for Hooked on Wooden Boats, you'll find me there. You can subscribe to the podcast through that, or you can download episodes, listen to whichever ones you want to. We've got a pretty good variety going now, 60 episodes to listen to, which is pretty cool. If you'd like to help support the show and you make purchases at Amazon or at Jamestown Distributors, if you go through my website to make those purchases, I get paid a small commission. So if you go to my homepage and click on the Resources tab, that'll show some Amazon products. If you click on any of those and make a purchase, I get paid. Also, my homepage is a banner for Jamestown Distributors. If you click on that, it'll take you to their website where they have marine and boat building supplies, great deals, good prices. And if you go there, I get paid a little bit if you make a purchase. I would appreciate any of that you would like to do. So I hope you have a great week. The whole purpose, or one of the purposes of this show, is to encourage people to build and use wooden boats, keep the art, craft, history, and tradition alive. If you've never built a wooden boat, I would encourage you to get out and do so. It's not that hard. Start small with an easy project and go from there, or go buy a boat or go out on a friend's boat, but get out on the water on a piece of wood, okay? All right, have a great week. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan over and out.